Members understand the rules for the, so I will not repeat them. Today we'll be examining one potential next step in addressing many of our financial services and fintech issues, which is a central bank digital currency. CBDCs are being researched, piloted, and implemented by central banks around the globe. In October of 2020, the Bahamas launched the Sand Dollar, the first CBDC to receive an official launch. China has entered the pilot phase of a central bank digital currency. And here in the U.S., the Federal Reserve has partnered with MIT to research the technological architecture of a digitalized U.S. dollar. As the U.S. and the rest of the world moves towards central bank digital currencies, the U.S. must consider its effects on financial inclusion, consumer privacy, illicit finance, and business operations, among many other issues. The question is, will a digitalized dollar enable those outside of the traditional finance system to gain more access? Or will existing barriers remain prohibitive? And where will consumers deposit their digitalized dollars? Can a CBDC operate with the same level of privacy as cash? Or will requirements of the technology mean transactions can't be private? And what are the implications for our illicit finance teams? Another question is, do businesses have the technology to implement a CBDC today? Or will there need to be a significant lead in time to reach actual operation? Today, we have a distinguished panel of witnesses who will be able to discuss the pressing issues before us in the central bank digital currency space. These technologists, privacy and financial inclusion experts will help us better understand this technology and its potential impact on our financial system, and I look forward to this discussion. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Davidson, for 4 minutes for an opening statement. You're welcome, Mr. Davidson.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the recognition, and I would just express my excitement about being the new ranking member of this task force. It's an honor to take on the role to address this important policy area, and as we all know, we've all on this task force held strong interest in seeing America's future include a better regulatory environment for financial technology. Regarding today's hearing, the topic of central bank digital currency touches on many of the complicated issues presented by the emergence of fintech. It's safe to say that we are still in the learning phase when it comes to central bank digital currencies. With that in mind, I want to emphasize that it's imperative that we use these hearings to effectively gather information on the subject and to communicate what we do know. As some of you may have noticed, CBDCs have constantly grabbed headlines since China announced that they would pursue one. I acknowledge that there's incredible potential for a CBDC to enhance our financial infrastructure. However, I also want to emphasize that we must pursue CBDCs for the right reasons and not simply to pressure ourselves in a pursuit for the sake of trying to keep up with China. Adopting a central bank digital currency that embraces the ineffective financial and monetary rules of the past would be redundant or even detrimental. It's important for us to be objective in our approach and also receptive to new ideas as we have this conversation. It's been almost a month since Chairman Powell outlined how the Federal Reserve would approach the issue. In his announcement, he discussed the key focus would be on whether and how a CBDC could improve on our already safe, effective, dynamic, and efficient U.S. domestic payment system and its ability to serve the needs of households and businesses. He rightly explained that a CBDC would raise important monetary and financial stability, consumer protection, legal, and privacy considerations. As policymakers, we too must keep these considerations in mind as we determine principles that would underpin a potential central bank digital currency. It's my belief that if the United States were to pursue such a tool, we must do everything that we can to preserve the principles of sound money and privacy. I like that the chairman referenced cash. It is truly permissionless, and we should preserve cash and its characteristics in our payment system. This month, we've seen the report that consumer prices have jumped 5%. people are realizing that the US dollar is venturing further and further away from being sustainable sound money. For those unfamiliar with the term, sound money refers to a form of currency that is exempt from radical fluctuations in purchasing power over the long term. A 5% jump in consumer prices lacks any resemblance of sound money, and we've seen it distort our stock exchange, where it's now over 200% of GDP. While this topic may seem tangential to the structural development of a central bank digital currency, we must use the digitization of the US dollar as an opportunity to also discuss the current devaluation in the monetary system that we've seen. Remaining competitive on a global stage and remaining the world's reserve currency requires sound money. We must also use this moment to protect individual liberties, namely privacy. Should the United States pursue a central bank digital currency, government must refrain from becoming a centralized clearinghouse that doubles as a consumer data collection center. Too often we see government slowly chip away at the Fourth Amendment under the guise of security, but I urge my colleagues to resist this temptation to use the monetary system as a tool for control instead of as a store of value and a means of exchange. A central bank digital currency that is token-based would help avoid this pitfall, and I look forward to discussing this concept today. I understand that there are CBDC skeptics. I myself am skeptical of any central bank digital currency if it fails to uphold the two principles I just mentioned, sound money and privacy. There's a right and wrong way to go about it, and we must properly flesh out problems as we look into it. This requires us to look at the architecture, the infrastructure, and access that the chairman so importantly recognized that is completely accessible in cash. To the few skeptics who claim that there are no current problems that necessitate a central bank digital currency, I would caution against complacency. We cannot sit back and simply because we are the strongest economy, most robust financial system, and we have the world's reserve currency. Despite all of this, we still have many Americans who are unbanked or underbanked, and a central bank digital currency may help alleviate these issues. It may also help enhance our financial infrastructure if implemented correctly. Would it solve every issue? Almost certainly not, but it may offer an improvement over our current system. I ask those who are anti-central bank digital currency to keep these considerations in mind. Lastly, I know that some people prefer to use the central bank digital currency conversation as a vehicle to voice their opinions on other fintech issues more broadly. We certainly saw that in the Senate's hearing last week, and while I would not shy away from conversations on any of those topics, I hope that we can keep today's conversation focused on central bank digital currencies, since there's true value in that conversation, and it is the topic of the hearing. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the chairwoman of the full committee, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Waters, for 1 minute. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair Lynch. Today's hearings begins a series of hearings for the committee on an especially important topic, cryptocurrencies and other digital assets. As cryptocurrencies grow exponentially, I've organized a working group of Democratic members to engage with regulators and experts to do a deep dive on this poorly understood and minimally regulated industry. Today, we continue this discussion by considering central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, which are being created by governments around the world and which the Federal Reserve is actively reviewing. If properly designed, CBDCs have the potential to harness the positive innovations arising from cryptocurrencies and to digitize our dollar. So I look forward to this discussion, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, the full committee ranking member, Mr. McHenry, for 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Chairman Lynch, and thanks for your leadership on the FinTech Task Force. I want to commend the new ranking member of the task force, Mr. Davidson, for his engagement in these issues, and look forward to a productive conversation here. Look, as the United States considers a central bank digital currency, I think it's important that lawmakers be informed. I think that is a very important thing for us to be apprised of both the advantages and the risks of a U.S. central bank digital currency. On the advantages side, It makes for a more efficient, effective payment system. It could drive financial inclusion. On the risk side, it could limit growth. It could destabilize our financial markets in ways that we may not have fully considered. But I think it's important that we're versed deeply on both the advantages, but also the risks and the challenges. And I concur with the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Mr. Powell, when he says it's more important for the U.S. government. It's more important for the U.S. government to get this right than to be first. It is more important for us to get this right than to be first. And I think we all should agree that that is the appropriate thing. I look forward to the hearing. Thanks so much, Chairman Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. McHenry. Today, we welcome the testimony of our distinguished witnesses. First, we have Ms. Carmelle Cadet, the founder and CEO of EMTECH. EMTECH provides software solutions for central banks around the world. Ms. Cadet is an expert in how technology can be used to increase financial inclusion. Next, we have Mr. Jonathan Dharmapalan, the founder and CEO of eCurrency. eCurrency is a technology company dedicated to making central bank digital currencies a reality and is the partner of Jamaica's central bank in bringing their CBDC to launch. Next, we have Mr. Rohan Grey, law at Willamette University, a privacy and finance expert. Mr. Gray is also the vice chair for privacy at the Digital Currency Global Initiative at Stanford University. We have Dr. Neha Narula, the director of Digital Currency Initiative at the MIT Media Lab. Dr. Narula has led significant research on digital currency and leads MIT's partnership with the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston researching central bank digital currencies. And lastly, we have Dr. Jenny Gesley, a foreign law specialist with the Library of Congress. Dr. Gesley is an expert in financial supervision and has also done work for the World Bank and the Institute for Monetary and Financial Stability. I want to thank all of our witnesses for your willingness to participate and to help inform the committee. Witnesses are reminded that their oral testimony will be submitted completely, that their written testimonies will be submitted in completion, but their oral testimony will be limited to 5 minutes. You should be able to see a timer on your screen that will indicate how much time you have left, and a chime will go off at the end of your time. I would ask that you be mindful of the timer and quickly wrap up your testimony if you hear the chime, so that we can be respectful of both the witnesses and the committee members' time. Without objection, your written statements will be made part of the record. Ms. Cadet, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your testimony. Thank you.
Dear Chairman Lynch, Chairwoman Waters, Ranking Member McHenry, Ranking Member Davidson, and esteemed members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify and respond to your questions on how digitizing the dollar can address financial inclusion. My name is Carmelle Cadet. I am the founder and CEO of EMTECH, a US-based financial technology company helping central banks modernize with technologies like blockchain, cloud computing, and data analytics in order to close inclusion gaps. It is my pleasure to talk to you today about how a central bank digital currency, specifically a digital version of the paper cash that we know today, can be used for financial inclusion by design, make peer-to-peer payments resilient, lower cost of payment, and enhance user privacy. This conversation is very important to me personally, given my experience as a once unbanked minority person in the US, as a Haitian immigrant supported by a single mom, hi mom, who was paid below minimum wage. I learned firsthand the importance of accessing the financial sector. I am now in a position to create jobs, give something back, and promote innovative and actionable CBDC strategies in order to close economic and financial exclusion gaps. As you investigate the technological infrastructure for a CBDC to achieve financial inclusion, It's important to highlight that technologies such as distributed ledger technology, blockchain, and cryptography are tools that can be used to drive various outcomes. Some use them for good and some use them for bad. Therefore, there is a risk that as we think about the design for a central bank digital currency, that it is designed in the image of the status quo. It is also an opportunity to build and design a truly inclusive and resilient payment infrastructure for every person in this country. I hope this testimony will foster the latter. Issuing a central bank digital currency should not be about disruption of the current financial sector, nor is it about emulating Bitcoin or other crypto assets. Instead, CBDC in this context represents a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the U.S. to revolutionize its payment infrastructure. This should be considered to complement paper cash and to give everyone a means to participate in a digital economy with or without a phone, with or without a bank account. Moreover, it is important to realize that a retail digital cash solution, in order for it to be trusted by citizens, it can't be used to collect data at will. Protecting and even enhancing user privacy is a key requirement to deploying a CBDC every American can trust. Blockchain cryptography and robust regulations are indeed important to achieving the balance between privacy and fighting money laundering. Achieving those outcomes is not going to be easy. In our written testimony, we mentioned the concepts of Fed wallets and a green CBDC as potential design requirements worth testing for. As a technologist, technology and service provider for central banks, we are right now seeing around the world the role of digital and regulatory sandboxes as a tool to innovate, to research, to understand the desired outcomes and how they can be best achieved. To achieve financial inclusion, central bank should look to collaborate with a broad set of stakeholders such as banks, fintechs, and other regulators to ensure that the desired outcomes are safely achieved. A digital sandbox is a strategic tool to do so. To conclude, although many countries are exploring CBDCs today for various reasons, the US should lead in this innovation to solve real and acute problems here domestically, which include financial exclusion for millions, the need for modern financial infrastructure in the US. This will lower costs for payments for every American, for the US government, help combat money laundering, and improve the American family's family P&L. I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cadet. Dr. Dharmapalan, please correct me if I'm mispronouncing that, Doctor. I apologize. But Dr. Dharmapalan, you're now recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Waters, Ranking Member McHenry, Chairman Lynch, Ranking Member Davidson, and members of the task force. I'd like to thank you for holding this hearing and inviting me to testify. It is critically important for Congress to investigate the foundational aspects of central bank digital currency, CBDC, and to understand how CBDC should be designed in order to maximize its benefits. I'm honored to have this opportunity to discuss this important topic, and I'm here to urge Congress to give the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve the rules and the legal authority they need to create a digital U.S. dollar. The good news is that the rules for how a digital currency should work are largely an extension of the rules for physical currency as they exist today. In other words, central bank issued cash is the model for central bank issued digital currency. My name is Jonathan Dharmapalan, and I'm the founder and CEO of eCurrency, a digital security technology company founded solely to create the technology to allow central banks to issue CBDC. We are not a cryptocurrency company. We do not issue any coin, stablecoin, or currency of our own. We believe that only the United States government can issue a digital US dollar, and that the Treasury alone should create it and the Fed Reserve should have the authority to put it into circulation. Issuing a CBDC will require many policy and technological considerations. For example, it has to be financially inclusive. To ensure financial inclusion, a CBDC must be easily accessible and fully interoperable. Any CBDC must be able to operate within the existing payment rails of our financial system, including banks and payment cards, while extending to new apps, smartphones, QR codes, smart cards, and other innovative ways to store and transact digitally. Privacy is also an important consideration for a CBDC. Digitalization of currency has many benefits and can be an immensely powerful utility. However, if it's not implemented properly, it has the potential to invade individual and societal privacy. Any CBDC implementation must protect individual privacy in accordance with the law. It is possible, using a model based on the functionality of cash, to ensure privacy is protected. The Fed would not need to collect user information. Private sector participants, including banks and digital wallet providers, can manage KYC just as they do today. In order to have a well-developed, well-functioning CBDC that addresses these policy goals, we must first start with the law. A strong legal framework for the creation and the issuance of US dollar currency is already clearly codified. Today, currency comes in the form of notes and coins and is protected under a clear legal framework. This framework should be extended to include digital currency. The responsibility to securely produce notes and coins is currently placed on the Treasury. Adding the production of a digital currency would be a natural extension of the Treasury's role. The Federal Reserve can then fulfill its subsequent role as the issuer and distributor of that US digital currency. We believe that the technological solution to create CBDC should follow the laws laid out by Congress, and not the reverse, where laws are formulated to suit technology. In other words, our government should enumerate what standards a CBDC should meet and require that technology enables compliance with those laws and standards. To advance our understanding of CBDCs and to encourage the study of a US digital dollar, Congress should take the following steps. First, address the definition of legal tender in the US Code to add digital currency to the current standard of notes and coins. Second, clarify the role of the Treasury and the Fed Reserve in the creation and issuance of a digital currency. And finally, encourage the Treasury and Fed Reserve to initiate a digital dollar pilot program. Enabling a central bank digital currency in the United States is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for this Congress. The time is now for Congress to amend existing currency laws and set the rules of the road for a safe, secure, and inclusive digital currency. Fortunately for us, the model for a safe and secure currency that meets all of these requirements is already in place. It is the model we use for cash. We do not have to invent a new model. If we can demand the security technology is appropriately leveraged to support this model, we can enable a digital dollar CBDC in the United States. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Dharmapalan. Mr. Grey, you're now recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Lynch, Ranking Member Davidson, and members of this task force. In the interest of brevity, I will focus my remarks on 3 key points. First, when it comes to designing digital dollar infrastructure, Congress should resist falling into the trap of thinking that there can only be one. Instead, the United States should pursue and coordinate multiple concurrent avenues of experimentation and innovation through different agencies and institutional arrangements. Contrary to popular misconception, the Federal Reserve is not and has never been the only entity responsible for issuing currency or providing public payment services. Throughout American history, the Mint, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, and the US Postal Service have all designed, issued, and operated various forms of public monetary technologies. It is thus a mistake to equate and reduce the wide spectrum of digital fiat currency architectures and arrangements to the more limited category of central bank digital currency, which refers only to those models in which central banks are the exclusive issuers and administrators. The universe of possibilities that we should be exploring at this stage extends beyond what the lens of CBDCs allows us to consider. To be clear, I believe the Federal Reserve should and will play a central role in any future digital dollar regime. At the same time, however, I also believe postal banking infrastructure should be a top priority and non-negotiable component of any legislation to establish a digital dollar. Equally importantly, and to my second point, Congress should direct the Treasury to establish its own system of token-based eCash cards and virtual wallets as a complement to the account-based banking services provided by the Fed and the Postal Service. Contrary to certain narratives, account and token-based monies are not competing substitutes, but complements. They provide different functions and safeguards and should be developed in a parallel, coordinated manner. As the federal agency currently responsible for coins, paper notes, and prepaid debit card services, the Treasury is the most appropriate actor to lead the development of a token-based eCash system. Interestingly, I am not the first to make this suggestion to Congress. The Electronic Money Task Force of the Treasury Department first proposed a commission to look into developing a mint-issued stored value eCash card over 25 years ago. In an October 1995 hearing on the future of money before the House Banking Subcommittee on Domestic and International Monetary Policy, then Director of the U.S. Mint Philip Deal testified that the Mint's, quote, main interest in cash cards at the time was as a potential substitute for coins and currency. Rather than promoting financial inclusion within the banking system, eCash would preserve and maintain the same transactional freedoms and capabilities in the digital economy as physical cash has historically provided in the traditional economy. Which brings me to my third and final point. It is not uncommon to hear policymakers claim that designing a digital dollar system to allow for anonymous peer-to-peer transactions would be radical or extreme. I profoundly disagree. Transactional anonymity, like anonymity more broadly, is a public good and core bedrock of political freedom in a democratic society. It is difficult to imagine what America would be today if the Federalist Papers had not been published under a pseudonym, or if the US Supreme Court in 1958 had ruled in NAACP versus Alabama that the NAACP turn over its records of membership dues to the governor of Alabama as part of his harassment campaign against their desegregation efforts. Preserving the right to make peer-to-peer payments without third-party approval is, in fact, a small c conservative defense against the socially disruptive effects of digital technology and the internet. It reflects a first do-no-harm approach that ensures we carry the same freedoms into the future as we have enjoyed and fought for in the past. When it comes to digital transactions, we have a right to what Professor Joel Reidenberg calls privacy in public. If there is no compelling reason for public authorities or private platforms to know when I buy a meatball sub from a street vendor, then they shouldn't know. It's that simple. The way to limit the risk of data abuses is to not collect unnecessary data in the first place. Above all, Congress should adopt a principle of currency neutrality, similar to net neutrality, whereby digital fiat currency platforms and technologies are treated as common utilities available to all as a public good. If the digital dollar is to stand for more than surveillance, data mining, and political censorship like China's digital yuan or Facebook's Diem, American policymakers must be willing to articulate and defend a different set of principles and commitments, even when doing so entails difficult choices. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gray. Dr. Narula, you're now recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Lynch, Ranking Member Davidson, Chairwoman Waters, and Ranking Member McHenry, and members of the task force for the opportunity to testify today. I am the director of the Digital Currency Initiative at MIT. We focus on cryptocurrency, including Bitcoin open source software development and digital currency design. I'd like to note that my views are my own and not the views of MIT or the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, with whom we're engaged in a multi-year research collaboration called Project Hamilton. We will be releasing a paper and open source software later this summer. Today, I'm going to define a CBDC and its benefits, pose questions that should be answered before launching a US CBDC, a digital dollar, and suggest ways to answer those questions. A general purpose or retail CBDC is defined as a digital liability of a nation's central bank that is broadly accessible to the general public. That it is a central liability distinguishes it from commercial bank money, credit cards, and cryptocurrency. That its digital nature sets it apart from cash, and it is different from central bank reserves in that users can hold it directly. The promise of a CBDC goes beyond efficiency and financial inclusion. We have seen tremendous innovation in cryptocurrencies, and it is time to bring some of that innovation into our nation's currency. Digital currency offers an opportunity for a ground-up redesign of our payment systems. Together, a well-built digital dollar and other financial technologies could empower users and create a platform for innovation in payments, much as the internet created a platform for innovation by facilitating the transfer of information. Though promising, the way forward is not entirely clear. There are many open questions regarding how a US CBDC should operate, how users might access it, how consumer privacy would be protected, and even if a CBDC is the best way to achieve goals such as increasing financial inclusion. For example, 36% of those in the US who lack bank accounts also do not have smartphones. Many Americans do not have reliable internet connectivity. Such people could not use a digital currency that requires a mobile app or constant connection to the internet. At MIT, we are investigating designs that would enable forms of secure offline transactions. Financial transactions reveal sensitive data about our lives, and protecting privacy is essential for human dignity in a democratic society. Consumer privacy is a requirement for a US CBDC, as well as a potential competitive advantage. Yet much work remains to determine how to do this efficiently and effectively. More research is needed to determine how a CBDC might address these challenges. It would be a mistake to move to using a CBDC without understanding the implications for financial inclusion and privacy. Extensive collaboration between academic researchers and the public and private sectors, as well as research funding, is needed to make progress on these key questions. The first step is to obtain agreement on goals. In parallel, the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve should be investing more in research and development, not to build the digital dollar, but to understand its possibilities and implications, as well as spur technology development. To build consensus across varied stakeholders and create a neutral environment where the best ideas can flourish, we should rely on the principles of open source software development that have been so successful in the cryptocurrency space. The government's typical way of building systems, outsourcing to a third-party vendor, will not, in my opinion, work here. What is possible in terms of policy is inextricably linked to the technical implementation, and the US cannot outsource monetary policy to a vendor. As a first step, I recommend expanding the type of work that MIT is currently doing with the Boston Fed and other new collaborations between academia and the public sector. In conclusion, we have a once-in-a-century opportunity to redesign the foundations of the US financial system. Central bank digital currency might have the potential to increase financial inclusion, reduce transaction costs, and become a platform for innovation in payments, but only if designed and implemented well. I commend this task force for raising this important issue and encouraging this critical dialogue. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Gesley, you're now recognized for 5 minutes to give a summation of your testimony.
Thank you. Task Force Chairman Lynch, Ranking Member Davidson, Chairwoman Waters, Distinguished Member McHenry, Ranking Member McHenry, and distinguished members of the Financial Technology Task Force. It is an honor for me to appear before you today to testify regarding digitizing the dollar. My name is Jenny Gesley, and I'm a foreign law specialist at the Law Library of Congress. I've also previously worked at the Chair for Money, Currency, and Central Bank Law at the University of Frankfurt, Germany, and hold a PhD in law in the area of financial market supervision. In my testimony today, I will provide an overview of different design choices for CBDCs, reasons in favor of and against adopting a CBDCs, and some legal, economic, and technical considerations. And I will use examples from other jurisdictions to illustrate these points. On October 20, 2020, the Central Bank of the Bahamas launched the first worldwide retail CBDC, the electronic Bahamian dollar, also called the sand dollar. And one of its critical goals is financial inclusion. The People Bank of China recently became the first major bank of a major economy to launch a digital currency in several major cities. And Sweden's central bank recently announced that it will start the second phase of its e-krona project. And the UK and the European Union are doing exploratory work on a potential retail CBDC, although they have not made a decision yet on whether to issue a CBDC. So one of the main functions of central bank is to ensure monetary and financial stability in their respective jurisdictions and to ensure broad access to safe and efficient payments. So one of the core instruments by which central banks perform this function is by providing central bank money. So traditionally, central banks have limited digital account-based money to banks and other financial institutions, whereas physical central bank money, so meaning cash, is widely accessible. However, in some jurisdictions, the use of cash is declining, with the possibility of its complete disappearance, indicating that the public would no longer have broad access to central bank money. So this is one of the points where central bank digital currencies come into play. But the reasons for adopting a CBDC and the different design choices depend on many different factors, and they're different for each individual jurisdiction. So among other decisions, central banks need to consider the question of access. So should it be a retail CBDC or wholesale CBDC? The degree of anonymity, operation availability, interest-bearing characteristics, then limits or caps on individual holdings, and the technical solution. And like I said, the reasons for adopting a CBDC also vary. Among the reasons are the declining cash use in some jurisdictions, for example, in Sweden. Then also improve financial inclusion for unbanked and underbanked communities, which is particularly true for emerging market and developing economies, such as the Bahamas and other Caribbean jurisdictions. And there's also general interest in technological innovations for the financial sector and making the payments frictionless. On the other hand, there's also the fear that central bank money in transactions will be displaced by private digital tokens, such as cryptocurrencies in general, or stablecoins issued by corporations such as Facebook Diem. This is also one of the reasons that Sweden central bank cited. And there's also the risk of the so-called digital dollarization with regard to cross-border CBDCs, meaning the use of a foreign CBDC instead of the domestic currency, which has an impact on the domestic bank's ability to conduct monetary policy and ensure monetary stability. So if a central bank decides to move forward with a CBDC, they must make several considerations. In particular, they must consider whether the domestic central bank has the legal authority to issue digital currency and to make a legal tender if so desired. In compliance with anti-money laundering, I think my connection.
I'm not sure. Sure if that. Can our tech people try to get Dr. Gesley back again, or is that possible? All right. Gesley, we see you again. Would you like to conclude the last portion of your testimony? All right, I'm reclaiming my time. First of all, I want to thank all of the witnesses, all of the panelists for your contributions. I had a chance last night to read through almost all of the testimony, and there's certainly a richness of perspective here that I did not anticipate, but which is really delightful. So I'm glad that that's the case.
I apologize for the connectivity problems.
You were fine up until the last minute, Doctor. If you would like to conclude that, I would certainly yield the time. Okay, I don't think that's going to happen. All right, so Dr. Narula, I know that you're doing great work over at MIT. Thank you so much for being with us today. Listening to all of the testimony, reading through the testimony as well, there was there is the question of should not the policy inform the architecture? In other words, we have to provide direction, I think, to you to be helpful to decide, what will be the priorities and what are the essential elements and what is the functionality of a CBDC consistent with the role of the Federal Reserve and as you say, with this once in a generation opportunity to really redesign our currency. I wonder if you could just take some time and talk about the hurdles, the difficulties that you have encountered in trying to accommodate the different priorities from anonymity to privacy to the way this CBDC might unfold and who would be responsible for administering this. Mr. Grey suggests there should be, the Fed should be one of several, if not many. But that would obviously change drastically the role of the Fed in our monetary policy and some of the tools that the Fed currently uses to fight inflation and in control of the money supply. So I wonder if you could just talk about some of the challenges that you're facing in designing this.
Thank you for that excellent question, Chairman Lynch. It is indeed the fact that we have not yet, as a country, had a very deep discussion on exactly how we might want something like a CBDC to be administered, if at all. And I'm really happy that we are beginning to have that conversation today. This is just the beginning. I'm not an economist, so I will stay in my lane and not give too many comments about monetary policy. What I will say is that it is absolutely the case that we need to have a lot of research done in terms of policy and how we might want that policy to unfold, whether that's who would administer such a thing, how it's enforced, who would gate access, what exactly we want it to look like. That does not mean that we wait on the technology until we've had all of those discussions. What we found, and I think one of the most important things we found, is that in doing the technology research, we are surfacing critical, nuanced questions that policymakers might not have even known to ask to begin with. And we're very happy to be doing that work.
Well, that's great. Dr. Dharmapalan, you've also touched on this idea of policy should inform the architecture. Can you talk about that a little bit more and how we might balance, some of the competing interests? I know that the idea of inclusion is universal. I think that that is a main, a central tenet of this effort, but that has not necessarily been the case in some of the fintech world where we've gone to a mobile platforms or a digital iteration of cash, and we've actually seen some pushback from certain communities that feel that the move away from physical cash has disenfranchised some elements of society. So could you take a swipe at that, please?
I'm happy to, and thank you, Chairman Lynch. So one could argue that cash currency is the most inclusive financial instrument we have today. Anyone can access it, and its power is exactly the same in your hands, my hands, and in my children's hands. A $5 bill does exactly the same thing. So when we look at a digital currency, the model is cash. We have to be able to give the digital currency at least the power physical cash has, if not more, which is why we emphasize the fact that policy then drives the technology. So start with the fact that a physical currency instrument exists because of the law. Congress, many, many years ago, defined the law to enable legal tender in the form of US dollar notes and coins. They then gave the responsibility to create it without involvement with anyone else to the Treasury. The Treasury creates an incredibly secure instrument that they then put into circulation using existing infrastructure, starting with the Fed. The Fed then sends it to commercial banks. Commercial banks get it into their ATMs and through merchants and what have you, gets it in the hands of the public. And we have this incredibly financially inclusive instrument in cash. So we think that a digital currency should also start with those same principles in mind. Start with Congress, make the rules, give the responsibility to the Treasury to create a what we think of as a digital bearer instrument, just like cash, move it to the Fed, allow the Fed to distribute it using existing infrastructure without banks and others having to completely overhaul their current systems, and ultimately get it to the public so that they can use it online or offline with connections, without connections, just as they would a physical bearer instrument. This is what will allow for ultimate inclusion in the digital world for people who don't have smartphones, may not have internet access at all points, but will always have access to a digital form of cash.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Davidson, for 5 minutes for questions.
I thank the chairman. Thanks to our witnesses, and I am so excited that we're going to meet in person. We've seen a lot of technical glitches and a handful even at the start of this. So we're excited to see the light at the end of the tunnel here. And look, I am very encouraged by this dialogue about cash, and frankly, Mr. Grey, by your passion for privacy. And though you don't call it out explicitly, the third-party doctrine that leaves privacy in the hands of businesses highlights one of the big gaping holes in the Fourth Amendment. And if we get this structure right, we could really move past that sad part of America's history where Americans essentially surrendered their privacy in the late 60s, early 70s with respect to financial matters. And we've seen it eroded massively over these years. And so when you talk about the permissionless nature of cash, as our chairman and several others have, it's very encouraging because the rest of the financial system doesn't really have that characteristic right now. And so if we get a central bank digital currency right, in my opinion, it will certainly have the essential feature of privacy, and hopefully it will also develop something we've been lacking, also at least since the 70s, is sound money. So look, the architecture and structure are really, really important. So Dr. Narula, when you submitted your testimony and spoke, you do a great job of discussing the importance of protecting consumer privacy when developing central bank digital currency. Specifically, you note that it's essential for human dignity and democratic society. I can't agree more. And you then state legitimate public policy goals relating to combating criminal activity can be fulfilled while preserving the privacy of the public. With that in mind, can you discuss other CBDC pilot programs and the privacy standards other countries implement? What can the United States learn from these case studies, good and bad?
Thank you, Ranking Member Davidson. That's an excellent question about privacy and also what we can learn from other countries. Part of the benefit of the work that we're doing at MIT is that we're able to speak to many central banks and gather that input to learn about what's common amongst different central banks. I will say that there are very few central banks that have really gone far enough to begin to ask some of the more nuanced questions. There's just a handful, really. However, some of them have begun to ask very, very important questions about privacy. And I think what's really important to note is that it should be possible to catch criminals without the government having a record of every date, time, amount, and location whenever I buy a cup of coffee. That's just not something that's going to be practical. So there is an inherent trade-off here. Sometimes it's very fundamentally hard to get two different things at once. The ability to track bad actors implies a design that is less than completely fully private. I think the key is to find the right balance between these tensions, which is why extensive research and design is so critical. One very promising direction that my team is exploring is the application of cryptography to this question and tension. Using cryptography, we can hide the specifics of data while at the same time proving more general facts about that data. This will be challenging, and it's still an open area of research in which we are engaging, but I'm optimistic.
Yeah, thank you for that, and I'm encouraged by your work. And one of the important innovations it has been cryptography linked to blockchain technology. Ms. Cadet, in your testimony, you discussed the benefits of blockchain technology. You say blockchain technology can securely embed trust, compliance, privacy, and transparency. Can you outline why you think that blockchain is a more appropriate infrastructure model for CBDC as compared to a centrally controlled database?
No, thank you for that, ranking member. When we started our work in central bank digital currency, blockchain technology is something that we saw as a key differentiator to any other type of technologies and approaches to creating digital currencies. Especially when we talk about cash, a cash-like model for a CBDC will find many benefits from blockchain technology. The cash today, you don't need an intermediary to use it. If you have cash in your pocket, you don't need to ask permission or wait for the internet to come back up for you to buy a scoop of ice cream. So when we think about blockchain and the decentralization component of it, really can reflect what cash and bring some benefits that cash provide today. Cryptography, as the doctor mentioned, is a big component combined with blockchain, can not only provide the privacy, enhance the privacy that compared to what we have today, but also the embedded trust and the governance that can be enabled can run. So if we think about the Fed not particularly wanting to manage digital cash directly, blockchain technology enables self-governance, embedded governance with smart contracts and other capabilities that make it much more cost-effective and scalable as well.
Thank you so much. My time's expired. I appreciate your solid answers. I yield.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lawson, for 5 minutes for questions.
Chairman, can you hear me?
Can, yes, Mr. Lawson, please proceed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for having this meeting. I'd like to welcome the guests here today. This is quite interesting. According to the FCC 80th Broadband Progress Report, 19 million Americans, 6% of the U.S. population, lack access to broadband. The report goes on to detail that even in areas where broadband is available, 100 million Americans opt to not use it. This disparity is concerning me, and the CBDC is packaged as being a more accessible option to Americans than the traditional banking. So my question will be to the panel: how do we assure Americans, especially people who are not real versed on this issue, how do we ensure the American people, especially in rural areas, that they're not going to be left behind? How do we get this information to them, and how do we deal with elderly citizens who have basically been the backbone of American economy in the middle class to the point where they are right now? And this is to the whole panel. With this change, how is it going to work? You know, when we talk about ATM and everything else and not the use of cash, we really need some guidance. What can we tell our constituents?
If that's okay, gentlemen, I'll jump in here because this is something that we think about a lot. Inclusion for unbanked, inclusion for low infrastructure environments. I travel around the world. I'm originally from Haiti. And among the problems that we see when it comes to inclusion is the access and the understanding of a new financial asset. Financial literacy and education is a key component of the delivery and the introduction of a CBDC into the American economy. But while doing that, I think there is great value and great benefit into looking at the post office and local stakeholders and local physical institutions that, by the way, have experience in delivering and facilitating financial services in those communities. Community development financial institutions can also play a role in being interface providers and onboarding and offboarding stakeholders as part of this new digital network. I tell people that my mom is very attached to her $100 bill that she keeps in her purse. She's not going to give that away anytime soon. She will still want paper cash in her wallet. And for her to have access to paper cash and digital cash is something that I look at as a model for a lot of Americans and older Americans that want access, but giving them options and giving them a better way and more efficient way to receive the benefits, for example, we think can be great ways of integration for them.
May I jump in?
Go ahead, yes, please.
Thank you. I think when it comes to actually successful implementation as well as design of a digital fiat currency, it's critical to take the average person's trust and access to that as a core design constraint. One of the reasons why we're proposing that the Treasury issue its own trusted hardware-based token system that can be used offline alongside account or ledger-based systems is precisely to ensure that people can use it outside of the ways in which people use banks today. When we designed the Automatic Boost to Communities Act with Congresswoman Tlaib and Jayapal, we created an emergency responder corps that would actually deliver prepaid pandemic relief cards and perform a wellness check in the process to people's doors. And it's that kind of critical human infrastructure, like the Postal Service, that's going to be really important, not only to ensure that people can use a digital currency, but that they are educated and that they are involved in the deliberation process for its design.
I'll add a couple of thoughts, Congressman, to what Mr. Gray just said. If designed properly, you don't need broadband to access and use a CBDC. It should be able to exist in your wallet on a smart card, just like a card exists today, except now it's the United States dollar existing in your wallet in digital form.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have a long ways to go, and with that, I yield back.
That was great, Al. Great question and excellent answers as well. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Lukenmeyer, for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the hearing today. This is really interesting stuff here. You know, in listening to the witnesses today, there's a number of things that I think concerns that they brought up. You know, almost all of them talked about the privacy of the consumer information with regards to those people who own the digital currency. How we can make it difficult to launder money or use it for illicit financing. We've got to be able to protect against those things. We need to protect the value of the transaction at the moment that it's done from the wild swings of valuation, for instance, when we have like the Bitcoin. And then I think, another one that we really haven't gotten to very much here is protect the reserve currency status of the United States dollar. Ms. Gesley, I'd like to start with you with regards to, China is in the middle of getting ready to issue their own currency here, their own digital currency. They are a major player in the world. Their economy is second only to the United States. Do you see their ability to get out front on this as a threat to our reserve currency status, or do you think that this is not something that this is just going to be a supplement to the kind of monies that they use right now to transact business with?
Thank you for this question. It's a little bit out of my expertise, but I'll try to talk about it. First of all, China said that they would first use it for as a domestic CBDC, but they did mention that it could also potentially be used for cross-border purposes. So there is definitely a risk of the digital dollarization in this case, but that would also mean that there needs to be a huge uptake of China's CBDC by other countries. So if other countries, instead of now the U.S. currency, the U.S. dollar is a reserve currency, if other countries would then decide to take the Chinese CBDC and replace the US dollar with that, I don't see that actually happening because the way reportedly the Chinese CBDC will be designed has also lots of privacy implications. So the Chinese central bank will have lots of insight into people's information. So I don't see this as a very good alternative, even though they said they will try to use this also for cross-border purposes.
Thank you for that. Mr. Dharmapalan, do you see a problem with these digital currencies around the world as a threat to our reserve currency status, or do you think that this is, again, just a supplement way of transacting business to help people facilitate their daily transactions?
I think, Congressman, it's a slippery slope. Initially, it will look very much like people transacting their daily business. But if you go into a Southeast Asian country, you'll notice that at the local 7-Eleven, there is direct access to Alipay. If Alipay is now empowered as a Chinese yuan, and the public is buying materials from the local 7-Eleven using the Chinese yuan, it doesn't prevent then the 7-Eleven to buy their supplies using the Chinese yuan directly from their Chinese suppliers. So little by little, this could creep into other countries besides China and succeed in achieving what China really wants, is for mercantile payments to take place, merchant payments to take place using the Chinese yuan. So it goes first from a retail payment to ultimately creep into wholesale payments and payments for exports directly from China. So that risk does exist.
Thank you for that. Dr. Grey, quickly, it would appear to me that there's going to have to be some congressional authorization to be able to implement any sort of CBDC modeling or even the authority to issue this digital currency. Can you explain what your thoughts would be on that?
Yes, thank you. I think we should adopt a comprehensive approach rather than starting with a one institutional perspective. And by that, I mean, I think we should have Fed accounts of the kind proposed by Professor Menand and others, alongside a Treasury eCash, alongside postal banking. And we should design that legislation as a comprehensive package that combines retail, account, and token options. At the same time, it's going to be very important to get the perspective of stakeholders that are currently not in this process. Privacy advocates, groups who are involved with people who conduct remittances.
Thank you for that, Dr. Grey. Anybody who thinks the Postal Service is a way to deliver money has been asleep at the wheel for the last 30 years and how they actually perform when they're broke themselves. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Next on my list is the gentlewoman from Georgia, Miss Williams. I don't see you on the screen, but I know you might be on your phone. I'm not quite sure. All right, we're going to go to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green. I see you there, sir. You're welcome to ask your question for 5 minutes. Mr. Green, are you muted? We're going to go to Mr. Sherman, the next Democrat on the list. Mr. Sherman, the gentleman from California. We're going to go to Mr. Emmer, gentleman from Minnesota. You recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman Lynch. And Ranking Member, really made Ranking Member Davidson. Like Representative Lukemeyer before me, I'm very happy that we're hosting this timely hearing to discuss the potential of the United States digital dollar. As we probably now are all beginning to realize, this discussion is incredibly important from a national security standpoint and from a global competitiveness standpoint. With China's testing and rollout of the digital yuan, it's more important than ever to cement the U.S. dollar's dominance. The benefit of having a digital dollar would only come to fruition if it were open, permissionless, and private. We should not lose sight of these values, and we should not craft a CBDC that enables the Fed to provide retail banking accounts for Americans and, in fact, would convert the Fed into a consumer bank. And if it were such, it would be able to collect all sorts of private information on Americans. That is not what we want. Our banks and fintechs are doing a great job serving their customers and expanding access to financial services. And the competitive marketplace of the private sector can facilitate that goal. But the private sector has led the charge on innovating in the digital currency space already. The private sector developed our electric infrastructure, our telecommunications infrastructure, and the internet. If we're talking about programmable money and building off of the dominance of the U.S. dollar, we have to be involving the private sector. Whatever future innovation we discover from the CBDC will not come from the government. And I tend to agree with Representative Wickemeyer, certainly not from the post office, but rather from people and individuals building off it, just like there were underlying protocols for the internet. So the bottom line is that U.S. lawmakers need to stop being so skeptical of crypto and recognize that it's not going to go away. We need to support this technology. Anything to the contrary will push our innovators and our entrepreneurs overseas, where compliance is more streamlined. As China and other nations push ahead in this field, promoting transactions on blockchains through digital dollars or stable coins, it's becoming clear that the United States needs to craft a token-based digital dollar that is open, permissionless, and private. With that, Ms. Gesley, I want to ask you, I guess I'd put it this way, like the colonial pipeline, the centralization of data and information is a target for bad actors. The Fed isn't immune to this when their Fed wire system went down earlier this year. In wake of all these ransomware attacks, I think it's important to ask if the cybersecurity standards of the Fed are able to stand being such a target. If the Fed's CBDC goes down, many people would have problems accessing cash or other financial instruments if they're all linked to the CBDC. Could you please speak to the threat of this single point of failure and why we should explore stable coins and other means of financial transactions to circumvent or prevent the threat of crippling the entire financial system?
Certainly. So as you're saying, there's obviously always the risk of cybersecurity, hacker attacks. But I think normally, and that's also what we've seen with other countries, that the central bank normally uses intermediaries, such as the commercial banks, to issue their CBDC. And those banks normally have a very robust infrastructure in place. And then they should also, for example, in the Bahamas, when they register those so-called wallet providers, they made them go through, there's an independent third party that looks at their cyber security infrastructure to ensure that all these wallet providers will be able to provide the necessary security. And therefore, only those intermediaries that pass this test will be able to. So I don't think, and normally central banks, this would be, if it was all located at the central bank, a huge, additional task for the central bank, which they're not equipped to do at the moment. So having this with the intermediaries and then having independent third parties do the testing of the cybersecurity infrastructure is probably the way to go.
I appreciate it. I see my time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Stile, for 5 minutes. Gentleman might be muted. I'm sorry. Might be muted.
Very good. Well, I'll start off then by saying I look forward to our next hearing being in person, where the mute will be a little bit easier to do. But appreciate you holding today's hearing, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Mr. Luchtemeyer's comments, in particular on the importance of the United States dollar being the world's reserve currency, and Mr. Davidson's comments and Mr. Emmer's comments on the importance of maintaining privacy. I'd like to dive in as to the problem that we're trying to solve, and if I can, direct a question towards you, Ms. Gesley. Over the course of today's hearings, I think we've heard some disagreement about the structure of CBDCs stems from different views as to what problems the CBDCs are supposed to solve. So I look at the sand dollar and seeing that the problem was, how do we get funds from point A to point B in an island nation? Not a challenge in the United States, but a challenge for some island nations. I see what I think are some countries who are actually on the other side of the privacy issue, who are actually trying to remove privacy and trying to gain insights as to what their citizens are doing as being a problem that they are trying to solve. I don't want to solve that problem here in the United States. I think privacy of individuals is important. If I look at the FDIC survey of how Americans bank, in particular looking at the unbanked, 36.3% of households that are unbanked replied that they didn't have a bank because they simply don't trust banks. So I don't know that putting this in the hands of the federal government is going to get those people on board, that they would trust the federal government more than they trust banks. 19% said that banks didn't provide offers or didn't offer the products or services that they needed. And so what I'm looking for is, what problem would the CBDC necessarily solve? And what problems in particular have you seen other countries trying to address through CBDC's implementation, Ms. Gesley?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So if I could go back to the Bahamas, where they are trying to solve the financial inclusion problem. So they did several things. So for example, especially with regard to not trusting commercial banks. So they said in addition to commercial banks, there could be several wallet providers. So the wallet providers do this, the digital wallets where the CBDC will be. So they said also cooperative credit unions, but then also just money transmission businesses, payment service providers. So it's a wide range of providers. So if you don't trust the traditional commercial bank, you have the option, for example, you may be more likely to go to a payment service provider that you're already familiar with. Then another, also what they did there, they said that so all the wallet providers need to provide a financial inclusion strategy. So I can say, well, in this remote area, we're going to do it X, Y, Z. So the central bank can look at this problem. They're supposed to provide financial inclusion data.
Ms. Gesley, if I can follow up on that, because I think it's an interesting point, right? We want financial inclusion. We want to make sure that people who are unbanked have access to that. I think it's a very worthy cause. Do you see that goal was accomplished, or is that a goal that they set out to achieve, and was this not a successful path?
I think they're on the way to achieving this, especially after the launch. Now they added, for example, they added prepaid cards in collaboration with MasterCard, so that also people who don't necessarily have access to a smartphone, that they're able to use the sand dollar. So this is also another way, and I think the Bahamas is a good example, especially now that it's already in use, following along and seeing what improvements they're making along the way. I think it's very helpful. So that's something they added as they saw.
Would an analogy be a similarity as to how we're using food stamps in the United States, where there would now be a card? Is that almost what's occurring? It's
just a prepaid amount, yes, that is loaded onto the card. So everywhere where MasterCard then is accepted, you can use this card, and it just has the sand dollars loaded on it. Or sometimes they also have, with the problem when there's no internet connection, you can already preload something on your digital wallet, so you don't necessarily need to be online all the time.
So it sounds almost in many ways that they're using financial technology as much as they're actually using the digital currency to get inclusion into the financial system for many of their people.
Representative Still,
Looking
is
at
it
the
okay
time,
for me
I'm
to?
going.
Is it
I'm
okay
hearing
for me
some
to?
feedback here, but
Yeah,
go ahead.
I wanted to jump in to give you some color around this.
Very briefly, Mr. Cadet. Go ahead. Answer. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, as someone who participated in a pilot in the Central Bank of Bahamas, I wanted to give some color around the implementation. The financial inclusion was a big driver, but the access and making sure that the transactions could be done in real time was something that was executed successfully. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. Cognizant of the time, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back.
Okay. The chair will try again to recognize Mr. Green of Texas for 5 minutes. I'm not sure he can hear us. Mr. Green of Texas. All right, then I'm going to go with Mr. Gonzalez of Texas for 5 minutes. All right. Chair will recognize the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Gonzalez, for 5 minutes.
Do you mean the one from Ohio?
Okay, I'm sorry.
All right.
Chair is Indiana. I'm sorry.
I spent some time in Indiana, but in any event, thank you, Chairman Lynch and Ranking Member Davidson for holding today's hearing. And thank you to our witnesses for participating. I want to sort of stay on some of the topics that my friend Mr. Stile was just referencing with respect to expanding access and whether that's the problem we're trying to solve. I think it is sort of what's the best way for us to expand inclusion in the banking system and the financial system writ large. And so, Dr. Narula, I want to start with you, if I could, specifically on the design component of this. So you focused on what you're calling digital cash in your testimony and at the MIT study, and it sounds that that's true. Can you compare and contrast that to the two-tier and Fed wallet system, and why you've sort of trended in the direction of the digital cash model?
Certainly. Thank you, Congressman. And I'm from the Midwest. Ohio's a great state. Very different.
Wonderful state. Thank you very much.
Yes, there's been a lot of conversation about the direct versus two-tier CBDC models. And what I would like to say is that it's not exactly either or. There are actually a lot of very fine-grained choices about exactly how a digital currency might be distributed and how users might be allowed to access it. A key question, as you point out, is who will have access. It should be, I think, a wider swath of players than just commercial banks. Additional players could provide digital wallets for users and more interesting applications, for example, fintechs. But people should also be able to hold it directly, much as they hold cash directly today. Not because the CBDC is supposed to replace cash, but simply because cash is a great example of how we can provide the most access to the most people. We want to encourage innovation wherever it may come from. And if a CBDC were only limited to a small set of financial institutions, then it might not be able to serve as that platform for innovation in the future, nor would it help people who weren't interested in using a commercial bank.
Thank you. And then sort of building on that, comparing Ether and Bitcoin, which has sort of an open architecture and allows for a ton of innovation. And I think in many ways, part of the excitement around those technologies, at least for me, is in the DeFi movement and the ability to really create products that historically just haven't existed or we haven't been able to unlock. How do you see a digital dollar working either in competition with those products or alongside it? Like, do you see the architecture being similar such that we could innovate in similar ways via a digital dollar?
Thank you for that question. I think it's really important. I want to be very clear. I think that cryptocurrency and any CBDC are not in competition. They will coexist, and each will probably help further the other. Quite frankly, we wouldn't be here today having this hearing if it weren't for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. There was a lot of innovation there. There was a lot of really interesting applications. You point out the DeFi space. There's a tremendous amount of experimentation happening there. And we want to continue and encourage that experimentation and innovation. We want to make sure that the United States is at the forefront of that. I think CBDC is a natural thing to consider, seeing that innovation happening and thinking about how we might want to upgrade our financial systems broadly. So to me, these two things will coexist. They're both very important, and I don't see them as in competition.
Thank you. And then one criticism is that the digital dollar forces the Fed to replace retail banks and takes assets off bank balance sheets and moves them directly to the Fed. Is that necessarily true with a digital dollar or a CBDC? And how would you sort of solve that if that was an objective you did not want to see happen?
Thank you. I think this is a really important question. I'm not an economist, so I'm just going to speak from the perspective of a technologist. I think that there are ways to perhaps keep that from happening. It really depends on exactly how the system is designed and how much, for example, of the digital dollar is in circulation. So I think that this is something that could potentially be mediated. I know a lot of economists are looking at this problem, and I look forward to seeing more of the research that comes out, but I don't think it's a deal breaker.
Thanks. And I do think it's an important concern. I don't think we want the Fed to fully take over the banking system and to have every American with a bank account at the Fed. At least I don't want that for me personally. But I'm encouraged by your work and your testimony, and I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman from the great state of Ohio yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, once again. Can you hear us? All right. I'm going to go to the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for an opportunity to participate in this task force hearing. Mr. Dharmapalan, the American Families Plan Tax Compliance Agenda, released just last month, says that cryptocurrency poses a significant detection problem by facilitating illegal activity broadly, including tax evasion. Commissioner Reddick from my town of Los Angeles has testified that the annual tax gap in terms of what the IRS fails to collect, chiefly from the top 1%, is now high as $1 trillion, which means that we're seeing several $1 trillion of income concealed, which means over the year we're seeing tens of trillions of dollars of assets concealed. How could the Fed make sure that a digital dollar is not a tool for tax evasion? And how will you apply the Know Your Customer and anti-money laundering rules?
Thank you. Also from the great state of California. Thank you, Congressman. This is a very important question about transparency and the existence of a United States digital dollar that is visible to the Fed Reserve and the Treasury. It's important to recognize that cryptocurrencies were set up to actually bypass the central bank and maybe even bypass existing financial infrastructure. We think that the architecture for a central bank digital currency, United States legal tender, should be based on something other than cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies is a bad model. We have a much better model. It's called the United States dollar. And the United States dollar is a transparent instrument that protects our privacy, but also allows us to enforce KYC, AML, CFT regulations, which, by the way, are placed upon the private sector intermediaries to manage. When legal doctrine allows for that veil to be pierced and information collected using whatever necessary court orders, we are actually able to pursue bad actors through those AML/CFT KYC regulations. So moving away from the cryptocurrency model, I think it's important, and taking a step towards a transparent US digital dollar is the right way to go. So thank you for that question.
I'll caution you. You'll want your digital currency to be successful. You're going to be competing against others. And one of the ways to compete is to go after the tax evasion market. Making life better for tax evaders and making sure the top 1% both evade law and evade jail is something that will be well paid for in our society, as it has been for many years. And I hope that as we work to develop a popular digital dollar, that we don't get pulled into, we could be more successful if we just allowed people to have anonymous accounts. And look at this segment of the market. They want anonymous accounts. And shouldn't Americans have everything they want? They want anonymous accounts. So I'm hoping that as we move forward with this, that the know your customer rules, the anti-money laundering rules are there. I don't really have enough time to ask and hear the answer to a second question, so I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the distinguished gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. French Hill, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for letting me wave on to the hearing today. It's just been outstanding. What a great panel of witnesses that can comprehensively talk about this. I congratulate my friend from Ohio as our ranking member of the task force. Both of you keep up the good work. The issue of a central bank digital currency is something that I've worked on now for 2 years, and I want to thank my friend from Illinois, Bill Foster. Congressman Bill Foster and I have been focused on talking to the Treasury and the Fed about this since 2019 during our full committee hearings when we heard about Libra for the first time, Facebook's previous cryptocurrency idea. And we've introduced legislation this spring that would ask the Fed to formally do a study on just what the laws and regulatory changes would be necessary for the Treasury and the Fed to collaborate on a central bank digital dollar. And so this hearing is very timely, and I congratulate the work being done by the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston and MIT. Last year, we had a similar hearing on the task force with former CFTC Chairman Chris Giancarlo testifying. And there I agreed with his testimony that the Fed should not have direct accounts with individuals. I found that concerning. I understand the rationale for it. But as we look for ways to increase financial inclusion, obviously we heard testimony today about the lack of mobile phones and other issues. It's an all of the above strategy. We need our community development financial institutions. We need our nonprofits. We need our credit unions, our banks, all working to break down barriers to help the underbanked and unbanked have access to the American financial system so that they can save, invest, and better manage their money and grow in their capabilities for their families' work. So I don't think it's a one-size solution. I don't think a digital account at the Fed directly with individual households is some panacea towards that. I appreciate all the comments made on that so far today. Dr. Narula, can you talk about, you didn't really do this in your testimony, talk about some of the negative effects were we to have individual household accounts actually at the government owned and operated central bank?
Thank you, Congressman Hill, and thank you for your the work that you've been doing over the last 2 years to move this discussion forward. I think that unfortunately we've suffered from this binary choice that does not really need to be a binary. It's not a question of only accounts at the Federal Reserve versus no accounts at no information at the Federal Reserve whatsoever. I think there's a lot of fine-grained choices around exactly how a digital currency could be distributed and how to access it, and we need to find the right balance. a key question is who will have access. And Fed accounts are not the only way to do a direct currency. There could be benefits of something like a minimal direct model to act as a platform for innovation for the private sector, for example. So I think we still have a lot of work to do to figure out exactly where that line should be drawn. It's clear we want to bring the benefits of the private sector to bear on this, and we want to have that innovation.
Dollar plays into that. Again, my friend on the other side of the aisle, Jim Himes, and I've introduced a bill on this, the 21st Century Dollar Act. I encourage all my friends to co-sponsor that, again, where because of what China's been doing that we've talked about today, that this is another reason, another rationale for carefully assessing how to have a digital dollar. Because China is well known for what they're doing in WeChat and at the retail level. But their surveillance system and their strategy to extend the RMB to beat out the dollar over the next few years is operating on real time, not just retail, but across their Belt and Road initiative around the world. I really thank the panel. I appreciate you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman yields back. We're going to try one last time for the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green. If you would like to ask questions, he's recognized for 5 minutes. He seems to be non-responsive. I'm not sure if that's a glitch or he's just moved. First of all, I'd like to thank the members who have participated this morning. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. But especially I'd like to thank our witnesses. This has been a great group and very, very, very helpful. Perspectives, express yourself extremely well and enormously helpful. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for our witnesses through the chair, and those will be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. And I respectfully ask our witnesses, if you do receive a question, please try to respond as promptly as you are able. And without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in this record. I remind members that written questions and materials for the record should be submitted to email address
I apologize, but it looks like our chairman has dropped off, and if you're like me, we missed the closing portion of his comments. It does highlight the importance of being able to meet in person. It's been a rough year and a half for really planet Earth, but especially work like this in our committee. It highlights both the amazing part of technology and the limitations of it. So it'll be great to be in person. As science has wafted over into the House chambers, we're now able to gather safely, and it is a feat in its own right. Great testimony. It's an honor to be joined by colleagues who raised important concerns and highlighted important considerations in this, and for our witnesses, all of your expertise in this hearing, but in your written testimony. Thanks for the work, and thanks for the work that you guys are doing, day in and day out to bring attention and the right considerations to this. As for one objection, I will say the tax policy of the United States is outside the scope of the committee, but it highlights a shift to consumption taxes would be, another way to solve this, and it would be more private. So there are ways to solve all sorts of problems and keep privacy in concern. Thanks a lot, and without objection, I'll ask that we adjourn.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Congressman.